Welcome back to the channel where we remember the women who once lit up the screen, the stage, and the hearts of millions. Today, we step into one of the most heartbreaking and haunting realities of fame, the tragic overdose deaths of American female celebrities. These were women adored by millions, their faces known around the world, their talents unforgettable. But behind the camera flashes and red carpets were private battles, silent pain, addiction, pressure, and moments of hopelessness that the world rarely saw. Some had been fighting for years, others were caught in a single moment of darkness. But all of them are now gone, far too soon. Today, we remember their stories, not just for how they died, but for how they lived, for the joy they brought, the struggles they hid, and the dreams left unfinished. Judy Garland was a once-in-a-lifetime talent, a voice that could shake the heavens and a presence that lit up the silver screen. But behind the dazzling performances was a woman whose life was filled with struggle, heartbreak, and ultimately a tragic end. Born Frances Ethel Gum on June 10, 1922, she was a child performer, singing alongside her sisters before Hollywood came calling. MGM signed her at just 13, and soon she became a household name, stealing hearts as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, her voice soaring as she sang Over the Rainbow. That song became her anthem, a symbol of dreams just out of reach, much like happiness seemed to be for her. Garland's career was a triumph. Her films, her albums, her concerts, all brilliant, all unforgettable. But fame came with a price. The pressure of stardom crushed her from an early age. Studio executives forced her into extreme diets, gave her stimulants to keep her working, and sleeping pills to make sure she got some rest. She lived in a cycle of exhaustion, always expected to be perfect, always needing to be on. She battled with self-doubt, was told she wasn't beautiful enough, not thin enough, never enough. That damage followed her for the rest of her life, and over time, the weight of it all became too much. Her personal life was tumultuous, 5 marriages, financial troubles, and a lifelong battle with addiction. By the 1960s, she was still performing, still captivating audiences, but her health was failing. The years of substance abuse, stress, and emotional turmoil had taken their toll. By 1969, she was in London, married to her 5th husband, Mickey Deans, but she was fragile, barely holding on. Then, on June 22, at just 47 years old, she was found lifeless in the bathroom of her rented home. An overdose of barbiturates, the drugs that had been given to her as a teenager to control her, finally silenced her. The coroner ruled it accidental, but in truth, it felt inevitable. She had been running on empty for years, her body worn out, her spirit exhausted. Her death shook the world, but it wasn't just the loss of a star. It was the loss of a woman who had given everything she had, until there was nothing left to give. At her funeral, James Mason spoke the words that would define her legacy. She could wring tears out of hearts of rock. She gave so richly and so generously that there was no currency in which to repay her. Decades later, her music, her films, and her story remain unforgettable, a haunting reminder of the price of fame and the fragility of even the brightest stars. Nicole Smith's life was a whirlwind of fame, controversy, and deep personal tragedy. But it was her shocking and untimely death that left the world stunned. Once a small-town girl from Texas, she rose to international fame as a model, an actress, and a tabloid sensation. But behind the glamorous image was a woman who faced endless battles, from legal fights over fortune to personal struggles with loss and addiction. On February 8, 2007, at just 39 years old, Nicole was found unresponsive in her hotel room at the Seminole Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Florida. Her bodyguard and a nurse tried desperately to revive her, but by the time she arrived at the hospital, she was already gone. The official cause of death was a lethal mix of prescription drugs, with the sedative chloral hydrate being the main factor. She had been taking multiple medications, including powerful painkillers and anxiety drugs, which together created a deadly cocktail in her system. No illegal drugs were found, but it was clear that her body had been overwhelmed by the substances meant to numb her pain. In truth, Anna had been spiraling ever since the devastating loss of her son, Daniel, just months earlier. He had been her world, her anchor. And when he died unexpectedly in her hospital room, just 3 days after she had given birth to her daughter, Anna was never the same again. He had overdosed on a mix of methadone and antidepressants, and the grief consumed her completely. She tried to move forward, even fighting a bitter paternity battle over her newborn daughter. But those closest to her said she was barely functioning, lost in sadness and relying more and more on medication to get through each day. Her final weeks were filled with chaos, public appearances where she seemed dazed, rumors about her health, and increasing concerns about the people controlling her life. The woman who had once been a glamorous guest model and a larger-than-life TV personality was now fading before everyone's eyes. She had built her career on beauty, on Marilyn Monroe-like allure, on the scandal of marrying an 89-year-old billionaire. But in the end, her story became one of loneliness, legal fights, and a desperate attempt to hold on to happiness. Her funeral, held in the Bahamas, was filled with heartbreak as she was finally laid to rest beside her son, the only place she ever truly wanted to be after he was gone. Even in death, the battle over her life continued, with court cases over her estate, her daughter's paternity, and the circumstances surrounding her overdose. But beyond the headlines, Anna Nicole Smith was simply a mother who had lost her son, a woman who had spent her life searching for love, and a person whose tragic ending felt painfully inevitable. Amy Winehouse was one of the most unique voices of her generation, a singer whose raw talent and deep, soulful voice made her a global icon. But her life was marked by struggle, pain, and a tragic end that the world saw coming yet couldn't prevent. On July 23, 2011, Amy was found unresponsive in her Camden home in London, her bright light extinguished at just 27 years old. The official cause was alcohol poisoning, with reports stating that her blood alcohol level was more than 5 times the legal driving limit. Just a day before, she had spoken to her doctor, seeming sober and in good spirits. But behind closed doors, she was battling the same demons that had plagued her for years: addiction, mental health struggles, and the pressures of fame. She had tried to quit drinking multiple times, but her body, weakened by years of abuse, couldn't handle the sudden shifts. That night, alone in her bedroom, she drank heavily, and her body simply gave out. Amy had been spiraling for years, her struggles documented by relentless paparazzi and played out on front pages around the world. Just a month before, she attempted a comeback performance in Serbia, but she was too intoxicated to even stand properly, slurring her lyrics as fans watched in disbelief. It was heartbreaking to see. This was a woman who had once been unstoppable, whose music had touched millions. Amy wasn't just a singer, she was a force, her voice dripping with emotion, telling stories of heartbreak, love, and pain in a way no one else could. Born in London in 1983, she grew up in a musical household, influenced by jazz and soul legends. By her teens, it was clear she had something special, and she was signed to a record label early on. Her debut album, Frank, was a success, but it was Back to Black that made her a legend. The album, fueled by her personal struggles, gave the world songs like Rehab and You Know I'm No Good, and it won her 5 Grammy Awards in one night, making her the first British woman to achieve that. But behind the success was a woman in pain. Her tumultuous relationship with Blake Fielder Civil was filled with toxicity, drugs, and heartbreak, and when they separated, Amy spiraled even further. She battled addiction, bulimia, and depression, and though she had moments of clarity, brief stints in rehab, attempts at sobriety, it was never enough. The media hounded her every move, and the world watched as she unraveled in front of their eyes. In the end, Amy Winehouse became another tragic member of the 27 Club, joining legends like Kurt Cobain and Jimi Hendrix, artists who burned too bright, too fast. Her death wasn't shocking, but it was still devastating. She had so much more to give, but her demons won. Even today, her music lives on, her voice still as haunting and powerful as ever, a reminder of both her extraordinary talent and the pain she carried. The world lost Amy Winehouse far too soon, but her legacy will never fade. Janis Joplin was a force of nature, a voice that could shake the heavens. But behind the wild energy and untamed talent was a woman who struggled with loneliness and addiction, a battle that would ultimately take her life. On October 4th, 1970, at just 27 years old, Janis was found dead in her hotel room at the Landmark Motor Hotel in Hollywood, the victim of a heroin overdose, a tragedy that silenced one of the most electrifying performers in rock history. In her final days, Janis was in the middle of recording what would become her final album, Pearl, pouring her soul into every note, seemingly at the peak of her career. But beneath the surface, she was fighting demons that never let go. She had been using heroin again, a habit she had tried to kick multiple times. But that weekend, the dose she took was stronger than she expected. Her dealer had been selling a dangerously potent batch that had already claimed other lives. Alone in her room, she collapsed beside her bed, a cigarette still clutched in her hand. Her body discovered only when she failed to show up for a recording session the next day. It was a cruel, lonely end for someone who had spent her life chasing connection, pouring everything she had into music that resonated with raw emotion and pain. Janis had always been different, a misfit from Port Arthur, Texas, who never quite fit in, bullied for being unconventional, drawn to the raw, aching blues of legends like Bessie Smith, whose music spoke to something deep inside her. She found her escape in music, her voice an explosion of pain, passion, and defiance, rising to fame with Big Brother and The Holding Company before striking out on her own, leaving behind unforgettable songs like Piece of My Heart, Cry Baby, and the hauntingly prophetic Mercedes-Benz, recorded just days before she died. She wasn't just a singer. She was a phenomenon, a woman who lived fast, loved hard, and gave everything she had to her audience. But in the end, fame couldn't fill the emptiness she carried inside. Her death was a heartbreaking loss, another bright star gone too soon, joining the infamous 27 Club, alongside Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, and later Kurt Cobain and Amy Winehouse, artists whose brilliance burned too fiercely for this world. But Janis Joplin's voice never faded. Her music, her spirit, her defiant, untamed soul still echo through time, reminding the world of the woman who sang like she was on fire and lived like tomorrow would never come. Dorothy Dandridge was a trailblazer, a star who shined in a world that often refused to see her light. She was an actress, a singer, and the first Black woman ever nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in Carmen Jones. She captivated audiences with her elegance and talent, performing at legendary venues like the Cotton Club and the Apollo Theater. But behind the glamour was a woman struggling against racism, heartbreak, and a world that never made room for her the way it should have. Her final days were marked by deep pain, both emotional and physical. On September 7, 1965, she had a long phone conversation with a close friend, swinging between hope and despair, even singing Barbra Streisand's People in its entirety. Just hours later, she was found unresponsive in her West Hollywood apartment. She had fractured her foot days earlier, but it was a lethal mix of antidepressants that took her life, or so it seemed. The coroner initially ruled her death an accidental overdose, but later findings suggested a fat embolism from her injury may have been the real cause. She was only 42, a woman once destined for Hollywood greatness, reduced to a lonely, tragic end. Dorothy's life had been filled with struggle, abandoned by her husband while pregnant, raising a daughter with severe disabilities, swindled out of her earnings, and forced to sell everything she had. Despite it all, she fought for better roles, for representation, and for a career that transcended the limitations placed on Black women in Hollywood. She had talent beyond measure, but the industry never truly let her thrive. And when she needed help the most, she was left alone. Her death was not just the loss of a great actress. It was the loss of a woman who had given so much and received so little in return. Today, Dorothy Dandridge is remembered as a pioneer, a woman who opened doors for so many who came after her, even though those doors were often slammed in her face. She should have had the world, but instead, she was left with broken dreams and an empty apartment. Gilda Radner was a shining star in the world of comedy, bringing laughter to millions with her unforgettable characters on Saturday Night Live. But behind the laughter was a heartbreaking struggle that would ultimately take her life far too soon. Born on June 28, 1946, she grew up in Detroit with dreams of performing, a love she shared with her father until his tragic passing when she was just 14. That loss shaped her, but it never stopped her from chasing her dreams. She became one of the original SNL cast members, creating hilarious and beloved characters like Roseanne Rosenadana and Emily Latella, earning an Emmy and a place in television history. She went on to have a successful career in film and theater, meeting the love of her life, Gene Wilder, along the way. But just when life seemed perfect, everything changed. In 1986, Gilda began experiencing persistent pain and fatigue, symptoms that doctors brushed off for nearly a year. She was misdiagnosed multiple times, her pain dismissed, her concerns overlooked, until it was finally revealed that she had stage 4 ovarian cancer. By then, it was too late. The disease had already spread. She underwent aggressive treatments, enduring surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. But the battle was brutal. Through it all, she remained hopeful, even writing her memoir, It's Always Something, where she shared her struggles with raw honesty. For a brief moment, it seemed like she had won. She went into remission, and there was hope. But cancer is cruel. It returned with a vengeance, leaving her frail and weak. In May 1989, she was admitted to the hospital for a routine scan, but a sedative reaction put her into a coma. Joan Wilder held her hand as she took her final breath on May 20th, 1989, at just 42 years old. The world lost a comedic genius that day, but her legacy didn't fade. Her death sparked awareness about ovarian cancer, leading to early detection programs and research in her name. She was more than just a comedian, she was a fighter, a woman who turned pain into laughter and left a lasting impact on comedy and the fight against cancer. Gilda's light may have gone out too soon, but her laughter, her spirit, and her bravery live on. Peggy Lee, the legendary American singer and songwriter, lived a life full of music, passion, and triumphs. But her final years were marked by a slow decline in health, a battle she fought with the same quiet strength that defined her career. Born Norma Dolores Ekstrom on May 26, 1920, in Jamestown, North Dakota, Peggy endured a tough childhood, losing her mother at the age of 4 and facing hardship at home. Music became her escape, her voice a beacon that would take her from small-town radio gigs to the heights of stardom. She was discovered by Benny Goodman in the early 1940s, and from there, her sultry, soft vocals set her apart in the jazz and pop music world. With hits like Fever and Is That All There Is, she crafted a unique style that oozed sophistication and emotion, making her one of the most influential female artists of her time. But while the world saw the glamorous Peggy Lee behind the scenes, she was dealing with struggles that would eventually take a toll on her body. Her later years were plagued by serious health problems. Diabetes, strokes, and heart issues forced her to slow down, but she never truly stopped. Even in a wheelchair, she continued to perform, refusing to let illness steal her love for music. By the late 1990s, her condition worsened, and she was often confined to her home, where she spent her final days surrounded by memories of a lifetime spent in the spotlight. On January 21, 2002, at the age of 81, Peggy Lee suffered a fatal heart attack at her home in Bel Air, California. It was a quiet end for a woman whose voice had once lit up the biggest stages, a heartbreaking loss for fans who had been mesmerized by her music for decades. She was cremated, and her ashes were laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, marking the final chapter of a life that had given so much beauty to the world. Though she is gone, her voice, her songs, and her undeniable influence on music will never fade. Peggy Lee wasn't just a singer. She was a force, a trailblazer, and a true legend whose legacy continues to inspire generations of artists and music lovers alike. Shannon Hoon was a soul unlike any other, a voice that carried both raw pain and boundless joy, a poet lost too soon. Born on September 26, 1967, in Lafayette, Indiana, he grew up in a small town with big dreams, drawn to music from an early age. He found his calling when he formed Blind Melon in 1990, a band that would go on to capture the spirit of an era with their unique sound. His friendship with Axl Rose led him to contribute vocals to Guns N' Roses' iconic albums. But it was Blind Melon's breakout hit, No Rain, that solidified his place in music history. Hoon's mesmerizing voice and haunting lyrics resonated with millions. But behind the success, he was fighting a battle he couldn't win. His struggles with substance abuse were well known. Rehab stints, arrests, and erratic behavior became part of his story. He had moments of hope, like the birth of his daughter Nico Blue in July 1995. But addiction was a shadow that never left him. In October of that year, Blind Melon was back on tour promoting their album Soup, and Hoon's demons were taking their toll. He had hired a drug counselor to keep him in check, but after only a week, the counselor was dismissed. Then came October 20th, 1995, Houston, Texas. Hoon performed what would be his final show, a night that left fans uneasy. He was visibly unwell, lost in a haze, his energy erratic. After the show, he spiraled into an all-night binge, a destructive ritual he couldn't escape. The next morning, as the band's tour bus sat parked in New Orleans, their sound engineer went to wake him, but Shannon wouldn't wake up. Panic set in, an ambulance was called, but it was too late. At just 28 years old, he was gone, taken by a cocaine overdose, his body unable to withstand the years of abuse. His death was a tragic end to a talent so rare, a life so full of promise. He was buried in his hometown, his gravestone inscribed with lyrics from his song, Change, words that spoke of hope, of leaving a mark on the world. Blind Melon tried to carry on, but the heart of the band was gone, and nothing could replace the magic that was Shannon Hoon. Over the years, his legacy has lived on in tribute albums, books, and even a documentary made from the personal footage he shot throughout his short life. His music continues to touch those who hear it, a reminder of both the beauty and the fragility of life. He was a dreamer, a poet, a father, a musician who burned too bright and left too soon, another soul lost to the cruel grip of addiction, forever frozen in time as the barefooted, carefree voice of a generation that still mourns him. Kristen Pfaff was a rising star in the grunge scene, a gifted musician whose talent on the bass guitar set her apart. But her life came to a devastating end on June 16, 1994, when she was found dead in her Seattle apartment from a heroin overdose at just 27 years old. She had been planning to leave Seattle that very day, ready to move back to Minneapolis and leave behind the darkness she had fallen into. Her friend Paul Erickson found her lifeless body in the bathtub, a bag of syringes nearby, a heartbreaking scene that marked the tragic end of a life filled with so much promise. Kristen's struggles with addiction had started after she moved to Seattle to join Hall, the band that would bring her mainstream success, but also lead her into a toxic environment where heroin was everywhere. She had been clean for months, having checked herself into rehab earlier that year, and had just finished touring with her old band, Janitor Joe. Everyone thought she was on the path to recovery, but something pulled her back in, and on that fateful night, she made one last fatal mistake. Kristen had been deeply affected by the death of her friend Kurt Cobain just 2 months earlier, and many close to her believed his death had shaken her more than she let on. Born on May 26, 1967, in Buffalo, New York, Kristen grew up surrounded by music, learning classical piano and cello before teaching herself to play bass. She was not just a musician, but a fiercely intelligent and passionate person, studying women's studies at the University of Minnesota and working as a counselor for victims of sexual violence. She formed the band Janitor Joe in the early 90s and quickly gained attention for her aggressive, yet melodic bass playing. That talent caught the eye of Courtney Love and Eric Erlandson of Hole, who pursued her relentlessly until she finally agreed to join them. Moving to Seattle should have been the start of something great, but instead, it led her down a dangerous road. The music scene was filled with addiction, and despite her initial resistance, Kristen fell into the same trap. She helped shape Hole's breakthrough album Live Through This, bringing a depth and power to the band's sound. But behind the scenes, she was struggling. Her relationship with Eric Erlandson was complicated. Her friendships with people like Cobain were emotionally draining, and the pressures of fame were mounting. When Cobain died in April 1994, something changed in Kristen. She seemed more determined than ever to leave Seattle, to get clean, to reclaim her life. She made plans to return home, packed up her things, and even had her friend waiting to drive her back to Minneapolis. But for reasons no one will ever fully understand, she used heroin one last time, and it killed her. Her death, so soon after Cobain's, left another wound in a music scene already drowning in loss. Hole dedicated their first show after her death to her, and her mother accepted an induction into the Buffalo Music Hall of Fame on her behalf. A scholarship was created in her name to support young artists, and her legacy as a musician and advocate lives on. But the pain of her loss lingers, another life stolen by addiction, another talent gone too soon. Kristen Pfaff was more than just a bass player. She was a force, a brilliant, kind, and complicated person who should have had so much more time. But in the end, like too many others, she was swallowed by the very scene that had given her a voice. Their time was brief, but their legacy will live on forever in the hearts of their fans. Lisa Robin Kelly was a bright, talented actress who became a household name as Laurie Foreman on the hit TV series That 70s Show. But behind the laughter and fame was a life filled with struggle, pain, and an ending that left the world in shock. Born on March 5, 1970, in Southington, Connecticut, Lisa had big dreams and the talent to match. She pursued acting passionately, earning a BFA from DePaul University before making her television debut in 1992. Her charisma and beauty quickly landed her roles in popular shows like Married, With Children, The X-Files, and Charmed, but it was That 70s Show that brought her real recognition. However, her rise to fame was met with personal demons that slowly consumed her. Lisa suffered a devastating miscarriage, a loss that sent her spiraling into alcohol abuse. She admitted that her drinking problem became uncontrollable, leading her to abruptly leave That 70s Show during its third season. As her career faded, her struggles with addiction deepened. She faced multiple arrests, including DUI charges and accusations of domestic violence, painting a tragic picture of a woman battling demons she couldn't outrun. In the summer of 2013, after years of trying and failing to regain control of her life, Lisa made a final attempt at rehabilitation. She voluntarily checked herself into a treatment facility, hoping to conquer the addiction that had plagued her for so long. Her manager spoke to her just days before her death and said she was hopeful, determined to start anew. But on August 15, 2013, just days after checking into Pax Rehab House in Altadena, California, Lisa was found dead in her sleep. She was only 43. The initial reports provided no clear cause, but months later, the autopsy revealed she had died from an accidental overdose due to multiple drug intoxication. The irony of her passing in a place meant for healing only added to the heartbreak. She had been seeking help, fighting to reclaim her life, but in the end, addiction won the battle. Lisa Robin Kelly's story is one of immense talent, unimaginable pain, and a tragic reminder of how addiction can claim even the brightest souls. She was cremated, her ashes given to loved ones, and her memory now lives on through the laughter she brought to millions. But behind her radiant smile was a woman who was struggling, a woman who lost her way and, ultimately, her life. Her tragic end remains a sorrowful chapter in Hollywood's history, a cautionary tale of how fame, grief, and addiction can intertwine in the most devastating way. Brittany Murphy was more than just a Hollywood actress. She was a vibrant, talented soul who brought warmth and light to every role she touched. But behind that infectious smile and boundless energy was a tragic story that ended far too soon. On December 20th, 2009, at just 32 years old, Brittany collapsed in the bathroom of her Los Angeles home, struggling to breathe. Paramedics rushed her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, But it was too late. She was pronounced dead. The official cause: pneumonia, severe anemia, and a toxic mix of over-the-counter and prescription drugs meant to treat cold symptoms. But her sudden death raised countless questions. How does a young, seemingly healthy woman die so suddenly? In the months leading up to her death, Britney's once bright and bubbly persona had faded. She had lost weight, her voice had become weak, and close friends noticed she seemed exhausted, frail, and constantly unwell. She had been living in a house she believed was cursed, a home where she and her husband, Simon Monjack, had been battling persistent illnesses. The days before her death were heartbreaking. Britney was physically drained, battling severe respiratory issues, and despite her declining health, she never went to the hospital. She remained in that house, in the care of her mother and husband, both of whom were with her when she collapsed. The world was shocked. This was the same woman who had stolen our hearts as Ty in Clueless, charmed audiences in 8 Mile, and brought laughter with her voice work as Luann Platter in King of the Hill. Her talent was undeniable, her presence unforgettable, but her final days were filled with pain, secrecy, and an eerie sense of tragedy. And then, as if the story couldn't get darker, just 5 months later, her husband, Simon, died in the same house from the same causes: pneumonia and severe anemia. Conspiracy theories swirled. Was there something toxic in the home? Was there foul play? Had she been suffering from something more sinister? To this day, the circumstances surrounding her death remain unsettling. Britney was born in Atlanta in 1977, raised by a single mother who sacrificed everything to support her daughter's dreams. From an early age, Britney had an unstoppable passion for performing. Whether it was singing, dancing, or acting, she was a natural. Hollywood quickly took notice, and after years of small TV roles, her breakthrough came in Clueless, where she transformed the shy, awkward Ty into one of the most lovable characters in teen movie history. That was just the beginning. She proved she could do more than comedy, delivering unforgettable performances in dramas like Girl, Interrupted, and thrillers like Don't Say a Word. She was Hollywood's chameleon. Whether she was making us laugh in Just Married or tugging at our hearts in 8 Mile, Britney had a magic about her that few possessed. But with fame came struggles. The pressures of Hollywood, constant scrutiny over her weight, and whispers about drug use followed her everywhere. She denied it all, but those close to her saw the toll it took. Her career, once red hot, had begun to cool in the late 2000s. She married British screenwriter Simon Monjack, a man many in her life distrusted. He was controlling, secretive, and had a troubling past. After their marriage, Britney seemed different, isolated, exhausted, and no longer the vibrant star the world once knew. She was losing roles, struggling with her health, and living in a home that seemed to drain the life out of her. And then, just like that, she was gone. Brittany Murphy was a star that burned bright, but flickered out too soon. Whether it was a tragic case of untreated illness, a toxic environment, or something more sinister, one thing is certain: Hollywood lost a rare talent, and the world lost a beautiful soul. Her story remains a haunting reminder of how quickly life can slip away. And to this day, fans continue to mourn the loss of the girl who made us laugh, cry, and believe in the magic of movies. Kim Porter was more than just a model and actress. She was a mother, a friend, and a woman who left an undeniable mark on those who knew her. Born on December 15, 1970, in Columbus, Georgia, she chased her dreams from a young age, stepping into the world of modeling before finding her place in entertainment. She graced the screens in films and TV shows, worked behind the scenes in music, and played a key role in uplifting rising talents like Janelle Monáe. But for all her accomplishments, Kim's greatest pride was always her children, Quincy, Christian, Jesse, and Lila. Yet, despite the success and the love that surrounded her, life had a cruel twist in store. In the days leading up to her passing, Kim fell ill, experiencing flu-like symptoms that didn't seem serious at first. She was treated at home, even spoke about feeling better. And then, just like that, she was gone. On November 15, 2018, she was found unresponsive in her Toluca Lake home. The world was left in shock. A mother, so full of life, had slipped away without warning. It wasn't until months later that the coroner confirmed the cause: lobar pneumonia, a severe infection that had silently taken over her lungs. It was heartbreaking, a reminder of how fragile life can be. At just 47, Kim's journey was cut short, leaving behind children who adored her and a legacy that stretched beyond the cameras. Her funeral was a sea of sorrow as friends, family, and celebrities gathered to say goodbye. Sean "Diddy" Combs, her longtime partner and father of 3 of her children, was shattered, openly mourning the woman he had spent years loving. Even in death, Kim's name has been pulled into rumors and controversy, but her children have fought to protect her legacy, reminding the world that she was more than the gossip. She was strength, kindness, and grace. Her death left a hole in the lives of those who loved her, an absence that can never truly be filled. And as the years pass, her story remains a painful yet beautiful testament to a life that touched so many. Peaches Geldof was a young woman who seemed to have it all: fame, beauty, a successful career in television and modeling, and a family she adored. But behind the glamorous facade, there was a darkness she could never truly escape. Born on March 13, 1989, to rock star Bob Geldof and TV presenter Paula Yates, she was thrust into the public eye from the moment she entered the world. But tragedy followed her from an early age. When Peaches was just 11, her mother died of a heroin overdose, an event that haunted her for the rest of her life. In her own words, she struggled to process it, burying her grief deep inside and carrying it like a shadow. She built a career as a journalist, writing for Elle Girl and the Daily Telegraph, and later expanded into television and modeling, becoming a fashion icon and a voice for her generation. But beneath her success, there was a void she tried to fill in all the wrong ways. Peaches had experimented with drugs, but when she became a mother to 2 young sons, she swore she had left that life behind. In reality, she was fighting a losing battle. On April 7, 2014, her husband, Thomas Cohen, became worried when she didn't answer her phone. He called a friend who went to check on her at their home in Rudham, Kent. Inside, they found Peaches slumped on her bed, lifeless. Her young son, just 11 months old, was playing in a nearby room, unaware that his mother was gone forever. The police discovered drug paraphernalia in the house, and an inquest later confirmed the heartbreaking truth: Peaches had died of a heroin overdose. The same drug that had stolen her mother had now claimed her too. It was a cruel, tragic cycle that she had desperately wanted to break but couldn't. The toxicology report revealed that the heroin in her system was of a fatal purity, and puncture wounds were found on her body, signs of a habit she had tried to keep hidden. She had been taking methadone for 2 years in an attempt to stay clean, but at some point, she relapsed. She had been using again for months, and it had finally caught up with her. Her father, Bob Geldof, devastated, said in a statement, "How is this possible that we will not see her again? How is that bearable? She was only 25, a young mother with so much life left to live." But addiction doesn't care about potential, and it doesn't care about love. Her final Instagram post, haunting in hindsight, was a picture of her as a baby in her mother's arms, with the caption, "Me and my mom." Days later, she was gone, just like her mother before her. Her funeral was held in the same church where her parents had married, and where her mother's funeral had been held years earlier. A place of love, now touched by tragedy twice. Peaches Geldof's story is one of talent, struggle, and an unbearable sadness that she never fully escaped. She had everything to live for, but in the end, the demons that had followed her for years were too strong. And just like that, another bright light was extinguished far too soon. Leslie Carter was a young talent with a dream, a voice that carried the promise of something special, and a name tied to one of pop music's most well-known families. But behind the music and the fame, her life was full of struggles that eventually led to a heartbreaking end. On January 31, 2012, at just 25 years old, Leslie was found unresponsive at her father's home in Mayville, New York. She had been feeling unwell after a fall in the shower. But no one expected that just hours later, she would never wake up again. The official reports pointed to an overdose of prescription medications, olanzapine, a drug used for mental health conditions, along with a muscle relaxant and Xanax. She had been battling depression, fighting personal demons, and trying to find her place in a world that often felt overwhelming. Her death wasn't just another tragedy in the Carter family. It was a devastating reminder of the silent battles so many people fight behind closed doors. Leslie had so much to live for. Just a year before her passing, she had become a mother, welcoming her baby girl into the world. She had been planning to seek help for her struggles with addiction, with her brother Aaron trying to support her in the process. But time ran out too soon. Her funeral was held in Mayville, but the family's grief was clouded by tension. Her older brother Nick did not attend, saying his family blamed him for her death. The weight of fame, the pressures of life, and the burden of internal pain had taken yet another young soul. But Leslie wasn't just her struggles. She was a passionate musician, a sister, a daughter, and a mother. Born on June 6, 1986, she grew up in a house filled with music, watching her brothers rise to stardom while chasing her own dreams. Signed to DreamWorks Records as a teenager, she had a shot at pop success with her single Like Wow, even making it onto the Shrek soundtrack. But things didn't go as planned, and her debut album was shelved before it could ever see the light of day. She kept pushing forward, later forming a band called The Other Half, hoping to redefine her musical path. But the industry can be cruel, and the road to success isn't always fair. Even though she never reached the level of fame her brothers did, she had a spark, a voice, a presence that those who knew her never forgot. Sadly, Leslie's story ended far too soon, adding yet another chapter of heartbreak to a family that would go on to suffer even more loss, with her younger brother Aaron passing away from a similar fate a decade later. Her death was a painful reminder of how fragile life can be, how even those who seem to have the world at their feet can be struggling with battles unseen. Leslie Carter's name may not have dominated the charts, but her story is one that should never be forgotten. A story of dreams, love, pain, and a tragic ending that came far too soon. Jessica Savage was a rising star in the world of broadcast journalism, a woman who had shattered barriers and commanded the evening news with a presence that felt both powerful and intimate. But her story ended in a way no one expected, tragically and far too soon. On the night of October 23, 1983, what should have been a simple drive home after dinner turned into a horrifying accident that claimed her life. The rain was relentless that night, making visibility difficult, and as her companion, Martin Fishbein, navigated their Oldsmobile Cutlass Cruiser, he mistakenly took a wrong turn out of the restaurant parking lot. Unaware, he drove up a narrow, unlit towpath along the Pennsylvania Canal. The ground beneath them was wet and unstable, and suddenly, the car veered off the edge, plunging into the canal's shallow but deadly waters. The vehicle landed upside down, sinking quickly into deep mud, sealing the door shut. Inside, Jessica, Martin, and her beloved dog were trapped as water rushed in. No one heard their screams. No one saw their desperate attempts to escape. By the time a passerby discovered the wreckage hours later, it was too late. Both Jessica and Martin had drowned, their bodies still strapped into their seats, their final moments ones of terror and helplessness. It was a cruel and devastating end for a woman who had fought her way to the top in a male-dominated industry, only to have it all snatched away in an instant. Born on February 1, 1947, in Wilmington, Delaware, Jessica had a childhood shaped by both love and loss. When she was just 12 years old, her father, whom she adored, passed away from kidney disease, leaving a void in her heart and a fire in her soul to prove herself. She discovered her passion for broadcasting in high school, working as a teenage radio host before pursuing journalism at Ithaca College. Her relentless drive led her to Houston, where she became the first female news anchor in the South, then to Philadelphia, where she quickly became a beloved figure, a household name with an almost magnetic appeal. Viewers admired her poise, her striking presence, and the way she seemed to connect with them through the screen. NBC took notice and brought her to the national stage, making her one of the first women to anchor the evening network news. But behind the camera, Jessica's life was far from the polished perfection her audience saw. She battled personal demons, failed marriages, a controlling and abusive relationship, and a rumored struggle with substance abuse. Despite her professional success, she was lonely, often masking her pain behind the bright lights of the studio. Her second husband had tragically taken his own life just 2 years before her death, and Jessica had walked in to find him hanging in their home. She had picked herself up, as she always did, and continued working, but there was an undeniable weight pressing down on her. And then, just when it seemed like she was on the brink of a new chapter, everything ended on that dark, rainy night in Pennsylvania. The news of her death shocked the world. How could someone so vibrant, so full of life, be gone so suddenly? The accident was ruled a misjudgment, a tragic mistake in poor weather conditions, but it left a haunting emptiness in its wake. Jessica Savage had fought to be seen, to be heard, to prove that she was just as capable as any man in her field. She had lived for the news, had given everything for it, and yet, in the end, the headlines were about her. A woman who had once delivered the nation's stories now became one herself. And while her time was cut short, her legacy as a trailblazer, a fighter, and a woman who refused to back down still lingers, reminding the world of what she achieved and what was so cruelly taken away. Her second husband had tragically taken his own life just 2 years before her death, and Jessica had walked in to find him hanging in their home. She had picked herself up, as she always did, and continued working, but there was an undeniable weight pressing down on her. And then, just when it seemed like she was on the brink of a new chapter, everything ended on that dark, rainy night in Pennsylvania. The news of her death shocked the world. How could someone so vibrant, so full of life, be gone so suddenly? The accident was ruled a misjudgment, a tragic mistake in poor weather conditions, but it left a haunting emptiness in its wake. Jessica Savage had fought to be seen, to be heard, to prove that she was just as capable as any man in her field. She had lived for the news, had given everything for it, and yet, in the end, the headlines were about her. A woman who had once delivered the nation's stories now became one herself. And while her time was cut short, her legacy as a trailblazer, a fighter, and a woman who refused to back down still lingers, reminding the world of what she achieved and what was so cruelly taken away. Gia Karanji was once the face that ruled the fashion world, a striking beauty with piercing eyes and an unmistakable presence, a supermodel before the term even existed. But behind the glamorous covers of Vogue and Cosmopolitan, behind the flashing lights of Dior and Versus campaigns, was a girl struggling with a darkness she couldn't escape, a girl whose life spiraled out of control, leading her to one of the most heartbreaking deaths in fashion history. She was only 26 when she died, alone in a hospital bed, abandoned by an industry that once adored her. She had contracted AIDS, once the most sought after in the modeling world, was now frail and weak, her final days spent in pain and isolation. No designers, no photographers, no former friends from the fashion world showed up at her funeral. Just a few family members and those who still cared. Her story is one of incredible rise and devastating fall. Born in Philadelphia in 1960, Gia was the youngest in a broken home. Her parents' toxic relationship left her desperate for love, and she found comfort in the underground clubs of her city, particularly drawn to the Bowie Kids, a group of rebellious teenagers. She didn't just model, she commanded attention. She had an effortless coolness, a magnetism that made her more than just another pretty face. But success came fast, and so did the temptations, nights at Studio 54, the endless parties, the drugs, especially heroin, which became her escape from childhood trauma and loneliness. It started slowly, but before long, it controlled her. She'd show up to shoots high, disappear in the middle of assignments, nod off in front of the camera. Photographers tried to help, but the industry moved on. New faces came in, and Gia, once the job stopped coming, she went back home, hoping to rebuild her life. She tried rehab, tried working normal jobs, but heroin had its grip on her. In her final years, she resorted to prostitution in Atlantic City to support her addiction. It was during this time she unknowingly contracted HIV. In 1986, She fell ill, pneumonia first, then the devastating diagnosis. At a time when AIDS was a death sentence and a source of fear, people distanced themselves. Even in the hospital, nurses hesitated to touch her. Gia spent her last days in suffering. She took her last breath, leaving behind a legacy of beauty, tragedy, and a cautionary tale of how fast fame can fade. Her story was later brought to life in the HBO movie Gia, starring Angelina Jolie, ensuring she wouldn't be completely erased from history. But beyond the film, beyond the tragic headlines, Gia was a young woman searching for love, for meaning, for something more. And in the end, she became a heartbreaking reminder that even the brightest stars can burn out too soon. She was wild, beautiful, and had a raw energy that couldn't be ignored. She was discovered by a photographer, and within months, she was in New York, walking into a world that would make her a star. She didn't just model, she commanded attention. She had an effortless coolness, a magnetism that made her more than just another pretty face. But success came fast, and so did the temptations, nights at Studio 54, the endless parties, the drugs, especially heroin, which became her escape from childhood trauma and loneliness. It started slowly, but before long, it controlled her. She'd show up to shoots hot, the job stopped coming. She went back home, hoping to rebuild her life. She tried rehab, tried working normal jobs, but heroin had its grip on her. In her final years, she resorted to prostitution in Atlantic City to support her addiction. It was during this time she unknowingly contracted HIV. In 1986, she fell ill, pneumonia first, then the devastating diagnosis. At a time when AIDS was a death sentence and a source of fear, people distanced themselves. Even in the hospital, nurses hesitated to touch her. Gia spent her last days in she took her last breath, leaving behind a legacy of beauty, tragedy, and a cautionary tale of how fast fame can fade. Her story was later brought to life in the HBO movie Gia, starring Angelina Jolie, ensuring she wouldn't be completely erased from history. But beyond the film, beyond the tragic headlines, Gia was a young woman searching for love, for meaning, for something more. And in the end, she became a heartbreaking reminder that even the brightest stars can burn out too soon. Whitney Houston, one of the greatest voices the world has ever known, was found lifeless in a bathtub at the Beverly Hilton Hotel on February 11, 2012. She was only 48. The official cause of death was accidental drowning, but the underlying demons that had haunted her for years, cocaine use and heart disease, played a devastating role. Just hours before, she had been seen looking disoriented, her voice shaky, her once radiant presence dimmed by years of struggle. That night, she was supposed to attend a pre-Grammy party hosted by her longtime mentor, Clive Davis. But instead, her lifeless body was discovered submerged in water. Her final moments remain haunting, a tragic ending to a life that had once seemed destined for nothing but greatness. Houston had captivated the world with her angelic voice, her ability to hit impossible notes with ease, and her unmatched stage presence. Born in Newark, New Jersey in 1963, she was practically raised in music. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a renowned gospel singer, and her cousin, Dionne Warwick, was already a superstar. Aretha Franklin, a close family friend, became an honorary aunt to her. Music was in her blood. By the time she was a teenager, she was singing backup for some of the biggest names in the industry. At 19, she was discovered by Clive Davis, and from that moment, the world changed. Her debut album shattered records, and her voice became the gold standard. Songs like I Will Always Love You and I Want to Dance with Somebody cemented her status as one of the best-selling artists of all time. But behind the dazzling smile and the breathtaking performances was a woman fighting personal battles. Her marriage to Bobby Brown, once a fairy tale, spiraled into chaos, riddled with accusations of abuse, drug use, and public meltdowns. The world watched as Houston, once untouchable, began to crumble under the weight of addiction. Her voice, once crystal clear, began to falter, her performances marred by inconsistency. She tried to reclaim her place, but the years had taken their toll. By the time she released her final album, I Look to You, in 2009, it was clear she was struggling to hold on. In the days leading up to her death, she had been seen behaving erratically, sweating profusely, and appearing lost in a haze. The night before she died, she reportedly clashed with a club security guard, looking disheveled and distant. Then, on that fateful afternoon, she was found underwater, unresponsive. The news of her death sent shockwaves across the world. The Grammy Awards, taking place just a day later, turned into a tearful tribute. Fans mourned, fellow artists wept, and the world was left to wonder how such a powerful voice could be silenced so tragically. Whitney Houston wasn't just a singer, she was a legend, an icon, a once-in-a-lifetime talent. Even in death, her music lives on, her voice immortal, forever echoing through the hearts of millions who still listen, still remember, and still grieve the loss of the woman who once sang as if heaven itself had blessed her with its sound. Dana Plato's life was filled with promise, fame, and talent, yet it ended in heartbreak and tragedy. She was a child star who rose to fame playing Kimberly Drummond on the hit sitcom Different Strokes, capturing the hearts of audiences with her charm and innocence. But behind the scenes, her life was anything but perfect. Born Dana Michelle Strain on November 7, 1964, she was adopted as an infant and raised in the San Fernando Valley. As a child, she had a passion for figure skating and acting, appearing in over 100 commercials before landing her iconic role. Her career took off, but the pressures of fame, coupled with personal struggles, led her down a dark path. At just 14, she began using drugs and alcohol, and by the time Different Strokes ended, she was struggling to find work. In 1991, she was arrested for robbing a video store with a pellet gun, an incident that highlighted how far she had fallen from her days as a beloved TV star. She later served jail time for forging a drug prescription, further showcasing her battle with addiction. Despite attempts at rehabilitation and sporadic acting roles, she never regained the success she once had. On May 7, 1999, she appeared on The Howard Stern Show, where she insisted she was sober and doing well, though listeners called in to express concern that she still sounded troubled. The very next day, on May 8, 1999, at just 34 years old, Dana Plato was found dead in her motorhome in Oklahoma, where she had been visiting her Vince's mother. She had taken a fatal overdose of painkillers and muscle relaxants, initially thought to be accidental, but later ruled a suicide. Her final days were filled with a desperate attempt to convince the world she was okay. But behind closed doors, she was still battling demons that had followed her for years. The tragedy deepened when, in 2010, her only son, Tyler Lambert, also died by suicide, eerily mirroring his mother's fate. Dana Plato's story is one of Hollywood's saddest, a young girl who had everything but lost it all, a cautionary tale of the harsh realities of fame, addiction, and the loneliness that can come when the spotlight fades. Though their light faded too soon, their legacy continues to shine in the hearts of fans. Marilyn Monroe, the golden-haired beauty who captivated the world with her charm, wit, and mesmerizing presence, met a tragic and lonely end on August 4, 1962, at just 36 years old. Found lifeless in her Los Angeles home, her hand still gripping a telephone, Monroe's death was ruled as a probable suicide caused by acute barbiturate poisoning, though speculation and mystery still shroud the final moments of her life. In the weeks leading up to her death, she was battling intense personal turmoil, her fragile emotional state unraveling under the weight of Hollywood's relentless pressures and her own inner demons. Struggling with depression, failed relationships, and professional setbacks, Marilyn had become increasingly reliant on prescription drugs. The night of August 4th, she was alone in her bedroom when her housekeeper sensed something was wrong, seeing light under the door, but getting no response. Hours later, her psychiatrist broke in through the window, only to find the world's most famous woman lifeless in her bed, surrounded by empty pill bottles. Marilyn Monroe had spent her final days isolated, disconnected, and desperately trying to hold onto a sense of purpose. Yet the world she had enchanted seemed to slip away from her grasp. Born as Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1, 1926, Marilyn's early life was marred by instability, moving between foster homes and orphanages, never knowing the comfort of a stable family. Despite her troubled upbringing, she transformed herself into the ultimate Hollywood star, a symbol of beauty, desire, and the epitome of glamour. Her journey to stardom began when she was discovered while working in a factory during World War II, leading her to modeling and eventually the silver screen. She quickly became a sensation, starring in classics like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Some Like It Hot, and The 7-Year Itch, films that cemented her as an icon. But behind the dazzling smile and the blonde bombshell persona was a woman deeply misunderstood, craving love, respect, and recognition beyond her physical appeal. Marilyn fought against the industry that tried to box her into shallow roles, even founding her own production company in an attempt to take control of her career. Despite her success, her personal life was tumultuous. Her marriages to Joe DiMaggio and Arthur Miller ended in heartbreak, and she often found herself battling anxiety, loneliness, and addiction. The pressures of fame, the constant scrutiny, and the emotional toll of feeling like a pawn in Hollywood's game weighed heavily on her. In her final months, she was dismissed from her last film, Something's Got to Give, due to her erratic behavior and declining health, adding to her spiraling despair. Her sudden death sent shockwaves around the world, leaving behind unanswered questions, conspiracy theories, and an everlasting legacy. Marilyn Monroe was more than a star. She was a woman who fought for her place in an industry that often reduced her to an image, a person who longed for genuine connection but found herself trapped in the loneliness of fame. Decades later, she remains an icon, a tragic reminder of the cost of stardom, and a woman whose legacy is forever etched in the golden history of Hollywood. Though her life was cut short, Marilyn Monroe's influence endures, her beauty, her pain, and her story continuing to captivate generations who see in her both the magic and the sorrow of a woman who had it all, but was still searching for something more. Eddie Sedgwick, the dazzling yet deeply troubled socialite, actress, and model, was a tragic figure who captivated the world in the 1960s, only to meet an untimely and heartbreaking end at just 28 years old. She had once been the shining star of Andy Warhol's factory scene, an it girl who embodied the rebellious, glamorous spirit of the era. But behind the flashing cameras and the whirlwind parties, Eddie struggled with profound emotional pain, drug addiction, and a deep sense of emptiness that would eventually consume her. On the night of November 15, 1971, Eddie attended a fashion show at the Santa Barbara Museum, then went to a party where she drank heavily. Feeling uneasy, she called her husband, Michael Post, to pick her up. On the way home, she voiced her doubts about their marriage, a foreboding sign of the inner turmoil she could never seem to escape. Later that night, Post gave her the medication she had been prescribed, hoping it would help her sleep. But something was wrong. Her breathing was labored, a deep, unsettling sound that should have been a warning. He thought it was her smoking habit, so he went to sleep, unaware that by morning, she would be gone. At just 7:30 a.m., Post awoke to find Eddie lifeless beside him. The official cause of death was acute barbiturate intoxication, a lethal mix of drugs and alcohol that blurred the line between accident and suicide. Her life had been one of extremes, privilege and neglect, adoration and abandonment, fame and self-destruction. Born into an elite but emotionally cold family in Santa Barbara, California, Eddie was raised in isolation on her father's vast ranch, where she and her siblings lived under strict, almost oppressive control. Her father, Francis Sedgwick, was a wealthy rancher and sculptor, but he was also a domineering and deeply flawed man. His extramarital affairs and emotional cruelty left permanent scars on Eddie, who later accused him of attempting to molest her as a child. Her struggles with mental health started young. By her early teens, she developed an eating disorder, cycling through dangerous patterns of starvation and binging. At just 13, she was pulled from school because of her declining health, and by the time she was in her late teens, she had already spent time in psychiatric institutions battling anorexia and depression. The deaths of her two older brothers, one by suicide and the other in a motorcycle crash, only deepened her suffering. When Eddie moved to New York City in 1964, she was looking for an escape, a new identity, and in Andy Warhol, she found someone who saw her as the ultimate muse. With her wave-like figure, striking eyes, and platinum blonde hair, she became a star in Warhol's experimental films, dazzling audiences with her effortless cool and hypnotic presence. But Warhol's world was fueled by excess, drugs, parties, and a toxic mix of fame and exploitation. Eddie, who had already been battling addiction, spiraled further into a life of heavy drug use, particularly amphetamines. Her relationship with Warhol soured, and by 1966, she had cut ties with him, hoping to carve out a serious acting career. But Hollywood never embraced her the way Warhol's world had, and soon her personal life unraveled. She had brief, intense relationships, including a rumored affair with Bob Dylan, but heartbreak and addiction followed her everywhere. By the late 1960s, Eddie was a shell of her former self, in and out of psychiatric hospitals, overdosing multiple times, and struggling to find any sense of stability. Her last hope seemed to come in 1971 when she married Michael Post and attempted to turn her life around. She had briefly sobered up, finishing the semi-autobiographical film Chow Manhattan, which chronicled a fictionalized version of her own descent. But the past was never far behind, and the demons that had haunted her for years returned. Just 4 months into her marriage, she was gone. Buried in a quiet cemetery in California, far from the glittering chaos of New York, Eddie Sedgwick's story remains one of the most tragic of her time. A woman who had everything and nothing all at once. Her beauty and charm made her a legend, but the pain she carried inside was too heavy for even the brightest spotlight to hide. Anissa Jones was just 18 when her life came to a tragic and heartbreaking end on August 28, 1976. Found lifeless in a friend's house after what was described as one of the most severe drug overdoses the San Diego County coroner had ever seen. The young actress, who once charmed audiences as Buffy on Family Affair, had struggled with the pressure of early fame, the loss of her career, and the pain of feeling discarded by Hollywood. That night, she had been partying with a group of friends, a mix of teenagers and young adults, unaware that it would be her last. By morning, she was gone, the toxic mix of cocaine, PCP, Quaaludes, and Seconal in her system proving too much for her body to handle. Her final days were filled with reckless choices, the excitement of newfound independence after gaining control of her finances, and the numbing effect of substances that, in the end, silenced a young life filled with promise. Anissa was born on March 11, 1958 in West Lafayette, Indiana, and spent her early childhood in West Virginia before her family moved to California. Acting seemed to come naturally to her, and by the age of 6, she was appearing in commercials. At 8, she landed the role that made her famous, Buffy Davis, the adorable twin on Family Affair. The show was a massive hit, and Anissa became a household name, instantly recognizable with her signature pigtailed look and beloved doll, Mrs. Beasley. But behind the scenes, the realities of child stardom took a toll. When Family Affair ended in 1971, Anissa was just 12 years old, and Hollywood no longer had a place for her. She was typecast, audition rejections piled up, and she found herself lost in a world where she had once been the center of attention. She tried to return to a normal life, even working at a donut shop, but the damage had already been done. The industry that had adored her had moved on, and without guidance or purpose, Anissa spiraled into a dangerous lifestyle. She refused a role in The Little People, turned down Taxi Driver, and missed out on Pretty Baby, either by choice or because she was already slipping too far into addiction. Her father passed away from heart disease. Her parents' divorce had long fractured the family, and soon she was hanging out with the wrong crowd. When she turned 18, she came into a substantial sum of money from her Family Affair earnings, and instead of using it as a fresh start, it fueled her reckless behavior. The money was spent on fast cars, expensive shopping sprees, and most tragically, a never-ending supply of drugs. Just 6 days after her death, the doctor who had prescribed her Seconal was arrested for illegally providing drugs to young people, including Anissa. He would die of illness just months later, before facing trial. The lawsuit against his estate later determined that while he was 30% responsible, Anissa herself was deemed 70% accountable for her own demise. Her mother, the last surviving member of her immediate family, passed away in 2012, leaving no one to tell Anissa's story but the fans who still remember her as Buffy. Her life became another cautionary tale of young actors used by Hollywood and abandoned when they were no longer profitable. The bright-eyed little girl who once lit up television screens with her innocence and charm had been left to fade away in the shadows, her life cut short by an industry that didn't know how to care for the children it made famous. Her ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean, a silent goodbye to a girl who never got the chance to grow up. Margot Hemingway was a name that once lit up the fashion world, a face that graced the covers of Vogue, Cosmopolitan, and Time, a supermodel who signed $1 million contract with Fabergé, and a woman who seemed to have it all: beauty, fame, and a name tied to literary royalty. But behind the dazzling smiles and glamorous covers, her life was a storm of struggles that eventually led to her tragic end. On July 1, 1996, she was found dead in her Santa Monica apartment, a victim of a fatal overdose of phenobarbital. Her body had been there for days, so long that dental records were needed to confirm her identity. It was a heartbreaking end to a life that had been marked by addiction, mental health battles, and a desperate search for meaning. Margot was born into privilege. Her grandfather was the legendary writer Ernest Hemingway, and with that name came great expectations. She grew up in Idaho, living on the family farm, and while her childhood seemed idyllic on the surface, deep wounds ran beneath. She struggled with depression, epilepsy, dyslexia, and bulimia, and later in life, she accused her father of sexual abuse, claims that led to estrangement from her family. Despite the pain she carried, she made a name for herself in the modeling world, becoming one of the first supermodels and making history with $1 million deal at just 21. Hollywood came calling, and she starred in the controversial film Lipstick. But while her younger sister Mariel soared in the acting world, Margot's career began to slip. She turned to alcohol to cope with her insecurities and the weight of expectations, and soon, her once glittering life started to unravel. 2 failed marriages, a stint at the Betty Ford Center, and a desperate attempt to reclaim her career led to disappointment after disappointment. By the time she was in her 40s, she was living alone in a small studio apartment, no husband, no children, and very few friends left. Those who knew her said she had been doing better, that she had seemed hopeful, but depression is a quiet predator. The demons she had fought for years finally consumed her. Her sister Mariel initially refused to believe it was suicide, clinging to the hope that it had been an accident. But as time passed, the truth became undeniable. The Hemingway family had always been haunted by tragedy. Her grandfather, Ernest Hemingway, had taken his own life, as had other members of their family. And now, Margot had become part of that heartbreaking legacy. Her death was not just the loss of a once famous model and actress. It was the tragic conclusion of a life filled with pain. A life that, despite its bright moments, was overshadowed by sorrow. She was laid to rest in the Hemingway family plot in Ketchum, Idaho, bringing her back to the land where she had once been a carefree girl before the world took its toll. Margot Hemingway's story is one of beauty and pain, of fame and downfall, of a woman who had everything on the outside but was fighting invisible battles on the inside. In the end, she became yet another victim of the darkness that had followed her family for generations. Dana Plato was a name that millions recognized from their television screens. A bright young star who played Kimberly Drummond on the hit sitcom Different Strokes, capturing hearts with her charm and warmth. But behind the Hollywood glamour was a life riddled with struggles that eventually led to her tragic death. On May 8, 1999, at just 34 years old, Dana was found lifeless in a motorhome parked outside her fiance's mother's house in Moore, Oklahoma. The cause? An overdose of painkillers and muscle relaxants. Initially, many believed it was an accident, but soon, it was ruled a suicide, an end that seemed almost inevitable given the downward spiral of her life. In her final days, she tried to convince the world she was okay, making an appearance on The Howard Stern Show just a day before her death. She spoke about her past mistakes, her battle with addiction, and her efforts to turn things around. But listeners weren't kind. Callers insulted her, accused her of being high, and questioned her sobriety. She was visibly upset, but insisted she was clean. Whether she truly was or just trying to hold on to whatever dignity she had left, we may never know. The next day, she told her fans, Robert Mankaka, that she wasn't feeling well. She took her prescribed medication, went to lie down, and never woke up. Her passing wasn't just the loss of a former child star. It was another heartbreaking chapter in the tragic stories of young actors who found fame too soon and struggled to cope with life after the spotlight faded. But before it all fell apart, Dana's story started like so many others. A young girl with dreams. Born Dana Michelle Strain on November 7, 1964. She was adopted as an infant and raised in the San Fernando Valley. She was a talented figure skater before Hollywood came calling. Landing commercials and small roles before Different Strokes made her a household name. But behind the scenes, her life was far from perfect. She started using drugs and alcohol as a young teenager, a problem that would haunt her for the rest of her life. When she became pregnant in 1984, the show wrote her out, and her career never fully recovered. Desperate for work, she took on roles in B-movies and even a controversial video game, Night Trap. Money problems, bad relationships, and legal troubles followed. She was arrested for robbing a video store in 1991 and again for forging a prescription in 1992. Her struggles weren't just about addiction. They were about a young woman who never found stability. Losing her mother, losing her career, and eventually losing custody of her son, Tyler, left her feeling abandoned and hopeless. And though she tried to rebuild her life, the weight of her past was too heavy. When she passed away, many were shocked, but those who knew her story weren't. It felt like Hollywood had chewed up and spit out another young star, leaving behind a cautionary tale. Even more tragic, her son Tyler would follow in her footsteps, taking his own life in 2010. Dana Plato's life was filled with pain, but for those who remember her, she was more than just a tragic figure. She was a young girl who once dreamed of being a star, who brought joy to millions, and who, despite everything, tried to fight her demons until the very end. Brittany Murphy was a bright, talented actress and singer whose life was tragically cut short at just 32 years old on December 20, 2009. Known for her roles in movies like Clueless, 8 Mile, and Girl, Interrupted, she had a career that shined with versatility. But behind the scenes, her final days were filled with mystery, illness, and heartbreaking circumstances. In the weeks leading up to her death, Brittany had been battling flu-like symptoms, and those around her noticed she had become increasingly frail. Living in her Hollywood Hills home with her husband, Simon Monjack, and her mother, she reportedly struggled with severe anemia and a worsening respiratory infection, yet she never sought proper medical treatment. On the morning of December 20th, she collapsed in her bathroom, and by the time paramedics arrived, she was barely clinging to life. They rushed her to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, but it was too late. Brittany went into cardiac arrest and was pronounced dead at 10:05 a.m. The autopsy later confirmed that her death was caused by pneumonia, severe anemia, and the effects of multiple medications, none of which were illegal, but together, they took a toll on her already weakened body. The tragedy deepened when, just 5 months later, her husband Simon was also found dead in the same home, from the same causes, pneumonia and severe anemia, fueling endless speculation and conspiracy theories. Some believed toxic mold in their house was to blame, while others questioned the medications in her system. Brittany's father even pursued independent testing, suggesting possible poisoning, but nothing was ever proven. Her mother, devastated, fought off rumors and legal battles, trying to make sense of the unimaginable loss. Brittany had been a rising star from a young age, growing up in New Jersey and later moving to Los Angeles with her mother to chase her dreams. She worked tirelessly to prove herself, landing roles that showcased her infectious energy, comedic timing, and emotional depth. Whether playing the lovable Ty in Clueless, the troubled Daisy in Girl, Interrupted, or voicing Luann Platter on King of the Hill, she had a charm that made her unforgettable. Despite Hollywood's pressures, she remained kind, humble, and full of life. But fame came with its struggles. relentless scrutiny over her weight, whispers of drug use she always denied, and the brutal reality of an industry that often turned its back when she needed support the most. Her sudden, tragic passing left a hole in the entertainment world, a painful reminder of how fragile life can be. To this day, questions still linger about the exact circumstances of her death. But what remains undeniable is her legacy, a talented, kind-hearted woman gone far too soon, leaving behind performances that continue to touch the hearts of millions. Lisa Robin Kelly, the actress best known for playing Laurie Foreman on That 70s Show, passed away tragically on August 15, 2013, at just 43 years old. Her life, once full of promise and success, took a heartbreaking turn in her later years, leading to a struggle with addiction that ultimately claimed her. She had voluntarily checked herself into Pax Rehab House in Altadena, California, in an effort to turn things around. But just days after being admitted, she was found unresponsive in her sleep. The coroner later determined that her cause of death was an accidental overdose due to multiple drug intoxication. It was yet another devastating end to a talent lost too soon, a story that has become all too familiar in Hollywood. Lisa's battle with substance abuse had been ongoing for years, and despite moments of hope, she could never fully escape it. Her decline was painfully public. Multiple arrests for DUI and domestic disturbances, allegations of physical altercations, and a tumultuous personal life that included a brief marriage and a troubled relationship with her ex-boyfriend. But before all of this, Lisa was just a young girl from Southington, Connecticut, with dreams of making it big. She pursued those dreams at DePaul University, where she earned a degree in acting, and soon after, she began landing roles in television. Her early career was filled with guest appearances on hit shows like Married, With Children, The X-Files, and Charmed, but it was that 70s show that made her a household name. Playing Laurie Foreman, the manipulative yet charming older sister of Eric Foreman, Lisa captivated audiences with her comedic timing and striking on-screen presence. She was set for a long and successful career, but behind the scenes, things weren't as bright. She later admitted that personal tragedy, a miscarriage, pushed her into alcoholism, which ultimately led to her abrupt departure from the show. Though she returned briefly in the 5th season, she was later replaced, and her acting career never recovered. Legal troubles followed, and by 2013, her life had spiraled into a series of public breakdowns, mugshots, and failed attempts at recovery. But even in her darkest moments, Lisa wanted to fight. She checked into rehab, hoping for a fresh start. Sadly, that new beginning never came. Her death was shocking yet not entirely unexpected to those who knew her struggles. Her manager recalled speaking to her just days before, saying she had been hopeful about her future, believing she was finally on the road to recovery. Instead, her battle ended in the very place meant to save her. Her passing was a stark reminder of the brutal grip of addiction, of how even those who seem to have it all, talent, beauty, success, can still be trapped by demons that refuse to let go. Lisa Robin Kelly's life was a mix of incredible highs and devastating lows, a tale of stardom and suffering, of dreams that came true and then unraveled. She will always be remembered for her iconic role, for the laughter she brought to millions, and for the tragic reality of a life cut short far too soon. Phoebe Snow, the legendary American singer-songwriter and guitarist, known for her soulful voice and timeless hit, Poetry Man, left the world on April 26, 2011, at the age of 60 after suffering a devastating cerebral hemorrhage that led to a long, painful battle with blood clots, pneumonia, and congestive heart failure. Her final days were marked by a deep struggle, as she remained in a coma for over a year, her body slowly succumbing to the complications that followed. It was a cruel twist of fate for a woman whose voice had once soared effortlessly over 4 octaves, who had touched the hearts of millions with her haunting melodies and unmatched vocal power. Phoebe was no stranger to pain. Her life had already been marked by hardship and sacrifice, most notably in her unwavering devotion to her daughter, Valerie, who was born with severe brain damage. Doctors had told her Valerie wouldn't survive long, but Phoebe dedicated herself completely to caring for her, putting her career on hold, and making every personal sacrifice imaginable. When Valerie passed away in 2007 at the age of 31, Phoebe's heart was shattered, and though she continued to perform, a part of her never truly recovered. Born as Phoebe Ann Lobb in New York City on July 17, 1950, she grew up in a household filled with music, from Broadway show tunes to Delta blues, shaping her into the artist she would become. She started performing in Greenwich Village clubs, carrying her prized Martin guitar from stage to stage, her voice capturing the attention of anyone who heard it. When she released her self-titled debut album in 1974, featuring the song that would define her career, Poetry Man, she quickly rose to fame, earning a Grammy nomination and solidifying her place in music history. But despite her success, her journey was anything but easy. She never fully embraced the commercial music industry, choosing instead to follow her own artistic path, often struggling with the pressure and expectations that came with fame. Over the years, she lent her voice to countless projects, from recording commercial jingles to collaborating with icons like Paul Simon and Donald Fagen, proving time and time again that her talent was boundless. Yet, behind the scenes, she was dealing with unimaginable loss and personal battles. She turned to Buddhism in her later years, seeking peace in a world that had given her both incredible gifts and unbearable sorrow. Then, in January 2010, the cerebral hemorrhage struck, leaving her in a fragile state, and for over a year, she fought against the odds, just as she had always done in life. But this time, the battle was too much, and on that fateful April day, the world lost one of the most distinctive and powerful voices of a generation. She was cremated, her ashes scattered, leaving behind a legacy of music that continues to inspire. Phoebe Snow was more than just a singer. She was a mother, a fighter, a woman of immense talent and heart, whose life was defined not only by the beauty of her voice, but by the depth of her love and the strength of her spirit. Dorothy Kilgallen was a force in American journalism, a columnist who dug deep into the biggest stories of her time. But her relentless pursuit of the truth may have led to her untimely and mysterious death. On November 8, 1965, she was found lifeless in her Manhattan townhouse, slumped in a chair, still dressed from the night before. The official cause was ruled as an accidental overdose of alcohol and barbiturates, but to this day, many believe there was more to it. Just days before, she had confided in friends that she was close to revealing explosive information about the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, a case she had pursued relentlessly, interviewing Jack Ruby and gaining access to confidential testimony. Her notes from that investigation vanished after her death, fueling speculation that she had been silenced. Dorothy was no stranger to controversy. Her syndicated column, The Voice of Broadway, ran in over 140 newspapers, blending entertainment gossip with hard-hitting political and crime investigations. She gained nationwide fame as a panelist on the hit TV show What's My Line, where her sharp wit and investigative instincts made her stand out. But long before that, she had already made history, competing in a 1936 round-the-world race, finishing second, and turning the experience into a book. Born in Chicago in 1913, Dorothy grew up in a family of journalists, her father a well-respected Hearst reporter. She followed in his footsteps, becoming one of the most fearless reporters of her era. She covered high-profile trials, including the Sam Shepard case, which later inspired The Fugitive, and she wasn't afraid to challenge powerful figures. But her personal life was complicated. She was in a strained marriage, carried on an affair with singer Johnny Ray, and struggled with alcohol. In the weeks leading up to her death, she was more determined than ever to uncover the truth behind Kennedy's assassination. She told friends she had something big, something that would shake the country. And then, suddenly, she was gone. Her death, though ruled accidental, was riddled with oddities. Her body was found in a room she rarely used, with books she never read placed beside her, and pills she was not known to take in her system. The only person in her home that night was a new hairdresser she had met just days earlier, who vanished after she died. Even the medical examiner's report left open the possibility of foul play. Today, many believe Dorothy was silenced for what she knew, that her death was no accident, but a carefully planned cover-up. Whether that's true or not, her legacy as a fearless journalist who never backed down remains. She exposed corruption, fought for justice, and challenged the official narrative when no one else dared. Dorothy Kilgallen lived and died in pursuit of the truth, and the mystery of her final days only adds to the legend of a woman who was never afraid to ask the questions others wouldn't. Phyllis Amanda Peterson, known to the world as Amanda Peterson, was once the fresh-faced, bright-eyed actress who captured hearts in the 1987 film Can't Buy Me Love. But behind the glamour of Hollywood, her life took a tragic turn that led to an untimely and heartbreaking end. On July 3, 2015, just days before her 44th birthday, Amanda was reported missing after failing to show up for a family dinner. When police entered her apartment in Greeley, Colorado, 2 days later, they found her lifeless body. The door was unlocked, and though there were no signs of foul play, the reality of what had happened was devastating. Amanda had died alone, the result of an accidental drug overdose. The official autopsy revealed that a mix of prescription painkillers, including morphine, caused respiratory failure. She had undergone a hysterectomy not long before and had been managing pain with medication, some of which she had obtained from a friend. While her mother insisted she had been drug-free in recent years, her past struggles told a different story. Amanda had battled addiction and mental health issues for years, with multiple arrests between 2000 and 2012 for assault, drug possession, and DUI. At one point, she even spent nearly 3 months in jail. But behind this troubled history lay an even darker truth. Her family later revealed that at just 15, Amanda had been raped, an incident that she kept secret for decades. That trauma, they believed, changed her forever, setting her on a path of trust issues, self-destruction, and a painful retreat from the spotlight. Before all of this, she had been a rising star, a young girl with big dreams who started acting at the age of 7 and quickly became a teen idol. She starred in TV shows like A Year in the Life and movies like Explorers before Can't Buy Me Love made her famous. But Hollywood can be a cruel place, and after a few more roles, she stepped away from the industry in the early 90s. She returned to her hometown, tried college, and lived a quiet life, but the pain she carried never truly left her. She was married twice and had children, but happiness remained elusive. In her final years, Amanda was living alone, receiving disability benefits, and struggling with her health. Bouts of pneumonia, sinus infections, and sleep apnea took their toll. Yet, her death came as a shock to those who loved her. Her father, devastated, described her as deeply religious in her later years and believed she had found some peace. But in the end, the pain was too much. Amanda Peterson, once full of life and promise, became another cautionary tale of Hollywood dreams turned into tragedy. Her story is one of incredible talent, unspoken trauma, and a life that ended far too soon. She was more than just a teen star. She was a daughter, a mother, a woman who deserved more from the world. And while she is gone, her legacy remains, forever frozen in time on the silver screen, a reminder of what was and what could have been. Judy Carne, the vibrant and spirited English actress who captured hearts with her infectious energy and signature phrase, "Sock it to me," on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, passed away on September 3, 2015, at the age of 76 due to pneumonia. Her final days were spent in a hospital in Northampton, England, far from the bright lights and laughter that once surrounded her. The woman who had once been the life of the party, the face of a cultural revolution in comedy, found herself living a quiet existence in a small village, a stark contrast to the fame she had once known. Her journey to that moment had been anything but easy, marked by highs of fame and laughter, but also deep valleys of personal struggles, addiction, and tragedy. Born Joyce Audrey Botterill in Northampton on April 27, 1939, she had a passion for dance and performance from a young age, which led her to train at prestigious theatrical schools before making her way into television. Her natural charm and comedic timing earned her roles in British television before she took the bold leap to America, where she quickly became a household name. She landed roles in sitcoms like Fair Exchange and Love on a Rooftop, but it was Laugh-In that catapulted her to stardom. As the mischievous and endlessly charming British girl who always found herself the target of slapstick pranks, she won over audiences with her playful, yet fearless, approach to comedy. However, behind the scenes, her personal life was unraveling. A tumultuous marriage to Burt Reynolds ended in bitter divorce, followed by another short-lived marriage to producer Robert Bergman. While her professional career was struggling, her battles with drug addiction and financial troubles only grew worse. The once celebrated star found herself entangled in heroin addiction, which led to multiple arrests and even time behind bars. In 1978, a car accident left her with a broken neck, a near-fatal moment that should have been a wake-up call. But instead, her downward spiral continued. By the 1980s, she had faded from the spotlight entirely, retreating to England where she lived a reclusive life, far from the fame that once defined her. In her later years, she made brief appearances, including a 25th anniversary special for Laugh-In. But the magic of her youth had long since dimmed. Her autobiography, Laughing on the Outside, Crying on the Inside, told the harrowing truth of her struggles, her battles with addiction, her failed marriages, and the loneliness that accompanied her fame. In the end, her body, weakened by years of substance abuse and hardship, succumbed to pneumonia, and she passed away quietly, a far cry from the dazzling star she once was. Yet, despite the darkness that clouded her later years, Judy Carne will always be remembered for the light she brought to television screens, for her laughter, her charm, and for that unforgettable phrase that made America smile. She may have endured pain, but she left behind a legacy of joy, and in the hearts of those who remember her, she will always be that lively, spirited girl who made the world laugh. Though they are no longer with us, their stories, their art, and their impact remain alive. Let us remember them not just for how they left, but for the unforgettable mark they made on the world. If you found this tribute meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next one.